3D. Alright, now when we start forearm twist, the first thing I'm going to do is take the forearm bone itself and I'm going to right click and clone it. So then I'll clone it as a copy, hit OK. I'm going to go into my bone tool because the only thing that was cloned was the bone itself and not the end nub. So I'm going to first of all hit create end, then go into bone edit mode and move that up to shorten that bone. I want this bone to be approximately a third of the length of the forearm. If you did 4 bones in here, you could actually get even finer control. I don't tend to feel like you really need 4 bones in there, so 3 seems fine. So I'm going to select that bone now. I'm going to reduce the taper and make the bone itself a little bit bigger so it's a little larger than the original bone, a little easier to see. Then I will also recolor the bone, again, so it's a little bit easier to see. Then now I can see it a whole lot better. Now after that, I'm going to go to create helpers point. I'm just going to make a point helper somewhere in the world here and then align it to this bone. Alright, so it was made really far off in space, but because it's now being aligned on the XYZ and XYZ orientation, it's where I want it. Now, before I do anything else, I'm going to actually copy all of this stuff. So I'm going to copy the point helper, the bone, and the bone's end. So I'm just going to shift drag that down on the local x-axis. And I'm going to make 2 copies. Now the third one here is a little bit long. I'm actually going to go back to the second one. I'm going to grab its end, go to bone tools, bone edit mode, and I'm going to shorten that up a little bit. And I can turn off bone edit mode. I'm going to grab this point helper and the next bone down. We'll move that back up a little bit. And then I will also go into bone edit mode and move this back a little bit farther. So it's just separated from the wrist and I can get to the control there a little bit more easily. Alright, now the next thing we need to do. Each bone here is going to have an IK helper. So I'm going to go to Animation, IK Solvers, HI Solver, and find its end. So I get 1 helper, 1 IK chain there. Then go to the next bone here, go to Animation, IK Solvers, HI, click on the next nub bone, and then for the last one, HI Solver, click on the final nub bone. Now, each of these bone chains basically has its own IK chain and its own point helper. The IK chains and the point helpers all need to be linked with select and link to the forearm bone. Now, every time that forearm bone moves, it's going to take the point helpers and the bones with. Then the bone itself gets linked to the point helper. So I link that to the point helper, link that to the point helper, and link that to the point helper. Now when the arm moves, it takes the bones, the point helpers, and the IK chains with it. Each point helper gets a rotational control called an orientation constraint. So I'm going to go to Constraints, Orientation Constraint. Then the rubber band is asking me here what I want to constrain the orientation of this object to. So I want to constrain it to the rotation of the forearm bone, and I'm going to add the palm object as a second orientation controller. Now I'll go to the next point helper and do the exact same thing. Constraints, Orientation, pick the forearm, then add the palm. Down to the next point helper, Animation, Constraints, Orientation, pick the forearm, then add the palm object. Now, one more thing I'm going to do. I'm going to go back to these bones and I'm going to add fins on the sides so we can see a little bit more about what's going on here. Make those fins a little bigger. So now I can see that these bones are oriented in the forearm. So back in the motion tab, I can go to the orientation constraint here and define the weights. So up in the elbow area for the forearm, I want this to be weighted more to the arm itself and less to the rotation of the palm. So I'm going to set the weight for the palm to about 20. And these are not absolute numbers. You may need to play around with that a little bit. 80, not 802, to get this to go exactly where you want it. Now the one in the middle here, its point helper should be about 50-50. That should be pretty good. Then the one down here, so my next point helper, to control this bone, should be weighted much more to the palm bone than it is to the arm bone. So I'm going to set the palm to 90 and the forearm to 10. Now as I look at this, and I animated the movement here to frame 10, I see out at frame 10 all these bones line up with the hand. So they're rotating quite nicely now, staying aligned with the forearm and with the palm. So now when these three bones are used in the skinning, they will allow us to transition the movement of that skin smoothly. That should do it.